A strong weekend for us in Spa. It's great to walk away with 11 more points to our name, just helping really push us ahead of others in that P5 in the championship. Still some teams close behind, and it's still a long way to go in the championship, which is why this matters all the more. It's always tough in a sprint race weekend to get on top of all of the changes, but what I'm pleased to say is the way we're working and have been working across the last few years, we can bring performance to even these sort of difficult weekends with a mixture of weather and not enough running, and walk away with a good result. There's a but. We're still in a situation here where it was fantastic for Carlos on Friday going through into Saturday morning, finishing P6 in the sprint, and great for Alex with his P5 qualifying and P6 in the main race. But in either occasion, we've had the other car outside of the points. And to make sure that we're really capitalizing on the car performance, we really do need to create a construct where both are scoring on any given weekend at the same time. We also suffered with a number of difficulties on Friday. It was not a clean Friday for either car, and that's something we certainly need to address going forward in the future. However, now onto the positive side, we have a good number of races in front of us with a car that is performing well in terms of performance. It's still a very close field. You can see that just a matter of milliseconds, as it was in qualifying here, will make a difference almost of 5 to 7 positions. So it's not going to be an easy run to the end of the year, but I'm optimistic we're in a good place. Welcome to the Vowles Verdict, presented by Kraken. First question's from James, great name, by the way. And this really was around what's the right balance fundamentally between running in the wet racing or have the safety first effectively, so we're not going to be going in true wet conditions going forward. And it's a good question. I'm sure it's one that the FI are grappling with. Ultimately, my perspective is this. We set Carlos's car up for a really wet race, and that first hour would have been pretty tough conditions for all drivers, but it was the spray that meant that the race was ultimately halted. Perhaps for a little bit too long, because really by the time we got going, it was only after the safety car was deployed, around 5 to 7 laps with real wet conditions. Not enough to make the setup changes work for any of the teams that decided to do so. That said, it is obviously a track that we have to recognise still has relevant dangers, especially on the run up to Eau Rouge, and it is really a balance between that, and also a balance between having a race that potentially could have had a red flag in the middle of it, which can dampen the overall sporting spectacle that we're trying to achieve. I think my view on this is, whilst we took a gamble on Carlos's card, my learning taking forward is that more than likely these are the conditions we will be racing at future events, and so we have to accommodate in terms of setup for that. And going forward, it's not that we won't be racing in wet conditions. Rain can happen during the course of races, as it did in Silverstone. I think it's just important that we have the visibility with all the cars stacked up in the grid to see where we're going. This question, which is the most liked question, is around, it looks to be difficult to get 2 cars in the points right together at the same time. And I think that's a fair observation. I'd put some surrounding evidence behind it as well that we talked through. So number one is, I think we have the closest field in Formula One that we've ever had. There are just milliseconds, especially in qualifying, you can see it, separating 5 or 6 cars. And the significance of that is, unless you are mighty quick, and we have to say McLaren were mighty quick, they had 2 cars very firmly in that top 10, and even then one was nearly out. We have to remember that going into Q3. You're now in a difference where just a few milliseconds, a small mistake on track can separate you between P6 and P14. There's only a couple of tenths separating those two. In an old world, that really didn't do much to your position, and that's not the case anymore. The second is, up and down the grid, I would argue there was big separation between teams. Lewis was at the back, Antonelli was at the back as well, so that's Mercedes and Ferrari had 1 car on either side of things. Again, look at the end of the race between where Hajar was and where Lawson was. It doesn't take much to go up and down the grid and realise that it's now so close that there is a spread between cars that normally were line astern on the grid. And by the way, I think that's a good thing for the show. I think we should be punished when we don't get it right, and I think teams should be punished in that circumstance. So we're really playing with fine differences and fine margins between the car. So if we wind back to Friday, what happened with Alex? We had, with both cars, in fact, problems. It was reliability problems to a certain extent. Alex's was a little bit of reliability, a little bit performance-based as well. Now, they're minor issues. They really are in the grand scheme of things. You saw we got running fairly quickly. But in the case of Alex, that performance loss actually carried through into sprint qualifying, into the sprint race the next day. It was fixed for Saturday afternoon. In the case of Carlos, that loss of running on Friday, he did really well to catch back up, but it meant he didn't have some of the learning that we were able to do on the other side of the garage. And when you're in fine margins, it all adds up. With Carlos, we went a direction on setup that was different to Alex. That's perfectly normal. Drivers should be exploring the bounds of it, but we went the wrong way with Carlos. And again, I go back to, whilst it's fine margins, it's enough to put you into a position where you're several positions behind. Again, with Carlos, overnight now going to Sunday, we took a gamble, and it was a gamble, that the race would be wet for a lot longer than it really transpired to be. So we went up on wing level, changed the car setup to more where Alex was, and tried a few test items. Now that would have worked for an hour of wet racing, but in reality we had just 5 to 7 laps without the safety car in front, and that wing level on the dry was punitive. It was much, much slower. As you saw, he was struggling to make progress as the result. So there are reasons behind everything, but what is clear to me is I agree with the statement in the question, which is, for us to be successful in this championship, we need 2 cars together, and we have the ability with our drivers. The next question is around what's the anomaly we found on the car setup. It's not so much an anomaly as it was a different direction to go down. It was a little bit different on ride height, being even more transparent about it, a little bit different on the damping and the characteristics of the car around the lap. Nothing that is a complete outlier, but when we are talking fine margins, it's enough to have lost just a little bit of performance against Alex. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to go more in Alex's direction. More so than that, what we really changed, and the big reason for going back to the pit lane, was putting the bigger rear wing on the car to try and maximise those wet conditions. And as discussed, that didn't pay off. Next question is from Ian, and it's around, is this upgrade really something that will give us benefit in Budapest as well? And the short answer is yes. It's fundamentally downforce that we've added to the car. Now, there's still going to be weak and strong circuits, so Spa, stronger circuit, I think Monza will be a stronger circuit, and I think Budapest will be a weaker circuit, but it's still one that I go in with the hope of scoring points at. Next question is from Dawn. It's sort of similar theme to before, but is it the nature of a sprint race that a driver can do better in a sprint and then do worse in the main Grand Prix? Yes and no. I'll try and answer that as best I can. I think we've gone through, there's a little bit of performance loss on Alex's car, which certainly meant he wasn't able to get up there. But I also have to comment on this. Carlos's first lap out in sprint qualifying 1 was exceptional. He was absolutely on the pace immediately. So what that sprint race format really does is it forces the driver to have to deliver immediately out of the box. And there are differences between drivers. There are those that can build up into it more and just build session on session, or even they need time to understand how the car's performing, get the most out of it. And in this circumstance, sprint qualifying really goes towards the drivers that are willing to put it more on the line to start with. So there's that element of things. It's also a team element. Teams that are able to get on top of their setup faster in that short space of time, the 1 hour period we have, will typically perform better, for example, in the sprint qualifying than the sprint race, but may drop back as others learn their car more by the time you get to qualifying and the race. So there's functions to it. But on this particular occasion, I don't think it's either of those in the case of Alex and Carlos being separated. I think that's more on us as an organisation to make sure we clean everything up and deliver within the same millisecond. Hard ask, but that's the truth behind this championship now.